it's important to remember that every single person is going through that, right? There's not someone on the other side who's getting 25 interviews and choosing the pick of the litter, right? Like everyone who is looking for a new job or is unemployed looking for a new job or trying to change careers, it's a numbers game, right? It's like that's a universal experience, entertainment or not. So that's being okay with that and knowing that it's not going to be like a high percentage of callbacks, of interviews, of next rounds, where you're competing against people just as qualified as you are, if not more qualified.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Hollywood Lot Life, where we explore the ins and outs of the elusive entertainment industry. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot. It's free to you and it just helps me grow as a channel overall. Whether you're about to study lines before your big break or listening while you go on your morning walk, a huge shout out to you for joining us. Today's guest is my good friend Matt. He works in TV finance at Sony Pictures. His job is to translate every operational and finance aspect of TV series into digestible stories for executives to understand the financial operations of a TV studio, which has become increasingly difficult in our COVID and multi-strike worlds. He reviews everything from production timelines, budgets, distribution estimates, marketing, and occasionally creative to create his financial snapshot. He's been working in TV finance for 6 years, and prior to this, he worked at PwC. He is a cinephile, outdoor enthusiast, and travels whenever possible. And if you follow him on Instagram, you will know he's literally everywhere all the time. So, Matt, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Appreciate that intro. Very warm and welcoming.
As we get into it, what is your current title at Sony Pictures?
So I am a senior manager of TV FP&A for Sony Television, basically.
I've got, so many questions around finance. I'm very curious on how that all works. But before we do that, I want to just start at the beginning. Are you originally from LA? Where are you originally from?
Sure. So I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's not a joke. People are from there, ironically. It's a weird thing when, like, after the year 2008, when you say where you're from, there's now like a new quip that comes along with it. But yeah, I'm from Scranton. Grew up there, moved to Boston for college, was there for 4 years, moved to Philadelphia for work, was there for about 4 years, and I've moved to LA in 2018. Been here for about 6 years.
So what made you want to make that jump from PwC to a career in entertainment?
Sure. I mean, originally when I moved out from Philadelphia, I moved out with PwC. And my primary driving factor at that time was the weather, a great place to live, a nicer environment, 365 days a year, no more snow, much larger city. And it was a big change to move from Philadelphia to LA. And I never really had spent much time on the West Coast and didn't know what West Coast life was really like. But yeah, initially I came out with PwC to start a small business within PwC, and I thought that I would maybe be doing that for a few years, but I think maybe in the back of my head, I did associate Los Angeles with the entertainment industry. And I had always been a cinephile and a movie lover and at theaters. And, yeah, I think part of this moving here, maybe not the primary reason at the time, was to move into entertainment. And it wasn't until about 8 or 9 months of living here that I started really thinking, wow, I would love to work in one of the studios. I wonder what that would be like, when you're growing up in Philly or even at PwC in LA. I didn't know people who worked at the studios. So in my mind, it was kind of like this black box of like, what would it be like to work there? Do I have to prove certain things to do an accounting or finance job at the studios? It just felt very exclusive from the outside. But it wasn't until about 7 or 8 months when I started doing some work with entertainment companies at PwC that I started thinking, hey, maybe I could see myself doing my job now, but at a studio.
Did you find it difficult to make that jump from PwC to Sony, or was it pretty transitional?
The actual day-to-day was easy once I was hired, right? Like going from one job to another is just like anything else in life. If you're believing yourself and you're focusing on your work and what the goal is and what people expect of you, Like you could get it done, right? Yeah, there was some days that extra hours, whatever. Like the work, like the transition from my side was easy getting into the role. But to get into the studio system was difficult, right? Because A, they're looking for people with a very certain type of accounting, finance experience, in my role anyways, right? In other roles, they're looking for people with other experience, but essentially there's only, 5 or 6 major studios. So if you're going to work at one of them, you want to work at one of these major ones, perhaps, right? That's what I wanted to work at. And there's only so many jobs at my level of expertise at those studios that I could be applying for, right? It's not like, hey, I just want to be an accountant anywhere, or I want to be an FP&A or finance anywhere, right? That's a lot easier to find a job somewhere. But when you're trying to find a job and there's only 5 companies that you're really looking at, that was pretty challenging. You're basically, when a job opens up, you're competing against everyone else in LA who's either looking for promotion, looking to break into the industry. It was very competitive. Or at least felt very competitive when I was applying to jobs back in 2019. So I'm definitely, back then and now, I've always felt very grateful to my boss for giving me a shot, for saying, hey, this guy doesn't come from traditional studio background. He might not know exactly what we do in this group, but I sense that he's a hard worker and that he would be able to get up to speed quick, and he had something that maybe someone who wasn't already just hopping around the different studios didn't add. When you're in the studio system, nobody wants to leave the studio system. It's fun when your end product is movies and TV. And so I would say 80% of the people who come into any given team, they've already been at another studio, and then you jump around to the next studio.
What does FP&A even mean for those at home that don't know?
Sure. FP&A means financial planning and analysis. It's an accountant for the future, essentially. And if we're standing right now, everything into the past through today is accounting. What you imagine is accounting. A transaction happens, you're counting all these transactions, you roll up to say, this is how well a business performed. Obviously, leadership wants to have that same understanding before it happens, right? They don't want to get to the end of the year and say, how did this happen? How did we end up with a major loss? How did we not have any successful products, or how did we miss all this? So essentially, the FP&A team is helping business plan into the future by drafting what accounting will look like for usually the next 3 or 4 years, with the most accurate data being the next 3 or 4 months, and the least accurate but best assumption data being 2, 3, 4 years into the future. And it's both what do we know now, but also where is this business going? We do a lot of analysis on what will Hollywood look like in 4 years? What streamers will exist? What kind of budgets will they be paying? What will people be watching? How much will TikTok come in and decrease the number of series that are made? How much will shift from domestic production to international production, English language to international languages? So it's really an all-encompassing trying to understand what the future will look like and translating that to our best ability into stepping into the shoes at that time. What will that cause our financial statements to look like and our performance as a company?
Walk me through, if we were to run, because you're on the TV side, you don't work in movies, you don't do anything movie side. If we were to say, a TV show like Seinfeld, as a today example, so we don't get into any of your work, how would you analyze your job with a show like Seinfeld? Walk me through your process if you can.
So Seinfeld is actually one of my shows. It's a Sony show. I don't directly oversee it, but we do manage Seinfeld. Sony manages the distribution rights of Seinfeld. But I mean, in general, right? You have current series that are on the air. We are basically aggregators of information when it's a current series. So for instance, I manage Outlander. Outlander is a big international show, tons of fans. It's a great show, high quality, creative, and I'm not paid to say that, but I think it is a great show. A show like Outlander, we basically have to create a financial model that says, here's what the initial network is paying us. When you go to watch Outlander, you see it on Stars. Here's what all the international networks will pay for that. So if you're in, a country that doesn't have Stars as an initial network, which is most international countries, they might say, BBC One or whomever in whatever country. Stars, I think, is in the UK, but if you're in, Japan and they want to watch it, it might be on wherever Japan's channel is. They're paying to license that TV show. So you're aggregating all of that revenue picture, and you're not alone, but you're working with all these teams that directly manage those different revenues. And then you're working with the production team to understand what's the cost of the show. How are we have a budget, like this is what we think the show should cost. Is it going over budget, under budget? Like we keep pulse as production's occurring. And with that, we are listening as things come in. Are there delays? Are there accelerations? All those things translate to the likelihood of financial overages or underages. We're working with the marketing team to get a sense of what's the overall cost of marketing for a studio, right? It's high level, like what does it cost to market 20 shows in a year? It's really anything you can imagine of either producing, airing, or distributing a TV show. We are capturing all that information from the teams who are boots on the ground managing that day by day. And then we summarize that up for every show, and then we summarize that up for all shows, and then we create different, triggering events, like when do these shows deliver, when do they air, and we use that to summarize a plan to say, these are all the revenues that we think will come in over the next 3 years. These are all the costs associated with it. It's more complex than that. There's very specific film and TV accounting rules that I won't go into. Don't want to put everyone to sleep, but we're basically using those rules to translate different real life occurrences into these financial models, roll them all up, and tell that overall plan. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's basically what like FP&A is doing.
How big is your team? Like, are you like 150 people strong? Like, if you're working across all these shows?
It's probably like most other corporate-y kind of jobs where it's not like everything's firing all at once. It's not like all shows are all producing all at the same time. You kind of have ebbs and flows in your schedule. Our team is, maybe 15 to 25 people at any given point from like a VP down. And I would say, yeah, like at certain points of the year, certain shows are in production or they just aired on TV. So you might have some fluctuations over that course of 2 or 3 months, but it's also not like movies where when a movie shows up in theaters, it could perform drastically different from what they had projected, and that they have to rerun all of their models. TV, it's pretty consistent. There's not a lot of things that will go totally off the rails, totally big surprises. You kind of have an estimate for international sales for shows. It's usually within that realm of that estimate. It's not like film TV. So even though, let's say I'm like a bigger fan of film than I am of TV, the work-life balance in film could be a lot more hectic because of these box office premiere schedules. So yeah, because of that, our team is able to do a lot as a pretty lean team.
Are you either in meetings or in Excel, or do you have other things outside of that?
I would say right now it's 60 to 70% meetings and 30 to 40% in Excel, siloed at my desk, just solving puzzles.
Now, this is a little twist, a different kind of question. What do you feel that you've done right with your career, and what do you feel like you've done wrong with your career?
That's a good question. I'll start with what I did wrong. I will say figure out where you want to be early, right? I spent 4 years in Philadelphia, had an okay time, but I always knew, for me, I call it like the train tracks are too tight for the train. If you have this feeling inside of you that you're just not on the right track, you're not on the right path, but you feel a sense of hopelessness that, this is the path that I chose, this is the major that I chose, this is the career I chose, and like, yeah, maybe I'm good at my job, so I'm excelling in that direction, so I don't want to leave the track, but the track isn't right. Just figure out early, maybe not how to like 180, but how to get towards a different track, right? For me, it wasn't like quitting my job at PwC, moving to LA and starting a completely new life. I stayed at PwC and moved to LA, and I said, if I'm in a different environment, new things could flourish. But I always look back at my career and said, I wish I did that 1 year into my job or 2 years into my job. I knew that early that, this wasn't for life. I looked at people who have gone down that career path, and I said, do I want to be them in 15 years and 20 years? And definitively, I knew I did not. So if you have that feeling and you're not inspired by where your bosses and your boss's bosses are now, you don't have to quit your job and travel the world and start from scratch and start a new college course or anything like that. Just figure out how to adjust pretty early on, whether it's a new city or making new connections or reaching out to people on LinkedIn or whatever it may be. Figure out how to start changing to that right track earlier. because it was challenging for me, and I consider myself blessed and very fortunate to have made my way to where I want to be. But I did it late, and the longer you take, the harder it is to start over, right? You have certain luxuries in life, certain expectations, you have certain commitments, certain family requirements. If you're the longer you wait into your career and the more experienced you are in one niche career, as your career goes on, right, you become more niche in one area, the harder it is to jump to that other area. So that's maybe a mix of something I did wrong, but also something I'm appreciative that I even made that move when I did. Something I did right, I would say I always focus on the people and the team first. Like no matter what you're doing work-wise, whether it's in Excel or in a room with creatives for 8 hours a day, all that matters is your team and the people that report to you, the people you report to, your relationships with those people, the pulse of the group, the energy. Is everybody happy? Is everybody getting by? Is everybody feeling inspired? Does everybody have a sense of purpose? And I'm always proud that I've focused on that over, we need to hit this deadline by this date. It doesn't matter if people are getting run over, like you need to get this deadline. That's not a way to work. It's not a way to treat people. You should never throw anybody under the bus. You should feel a sense of responsibility for anything that goes through your desk. So that's something that I do cherish. Part of it's, my dad runs a small business, so everything runs through him, everything ends at him. And just having a sense of ownership over the people you work with, over the work you do. And it's not all on your shoulders, right? You have people above you who are also, you want to be aligned with people who feel that same way above you. But I think that's what makes our team very successful. We don't have a lot of turnover on our team because people do feel very sheltered and comfortable and a lot of space to be inspired and to take risks. So it doesn't matter if you're in film, TV or not. As long as you have that mentality, you create an aura around you that people are attracted to and people want to work with.
Yeah, I think you make an incredible point. Some of my fondest memories of my time in LA was the people I worked with. Maybe, sure, some of the experiences of things I got to do and whatnot, but like the people I was with, those are the things that I look back with fondness that I really enjoyed most about my career.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is, right? At its more fundamental sense, we're just people working together on a common goal. It doesn't matter what that goal is. It's all about how you work in a team, how you experience things with others, right? And that doesn't matter if it's entertainment or not. Sometimes the worst work I was doing was with the best teams, and sometimes the most enjoyable work I was doing was with a horrible team. I would always prefer the former.
Do you have any advice for those who are trying to stand out in the world of entertainment? Because everybody talks about how they applied to a million jobs and only hear back from one. How do you stand out to make yourself stand out in the crowd kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, some of that's the market, right? That happens to everyone. I think a big piece of it when you're in your room and you're applying to jobs and you're not hearing back, it's important to remember that every single person is going through that, right? There's not someone on the other side who's getting 25 interviews and choosing the pick of the litter, right? Like everyone who is looking for a new job or is unemployed looking for a new job or trying to change careers, it's a numbers game, right? It's like that's a universal experience, entertainment or not. So that's being okay with that and knowing that it's not going to be like a high percentage of callbacks, of interviews, of next rounds, right? You're competing against people just as qualified as you are, if not more qualified, right? So always keep in mind and be humble. Like if you feel like you're qualified for a job, I guarantee 1,000 other people are looking at that same job, especially in an industry that only has a limited number of jobs and they're applying to the same thing, right? Like it's nothing against you. It's not that you did something wrong a lot of the time, most of the time. It's just a numbers game. A lot of it's keep in mind of it's going to depend on who's hiring, right? The specific person you would be reporting to that's doing the interview, that person may be looking for someone who is a cinephile, right? That might appeal to them. They may be looking to someone who could quickly solve complex problems. They may be looking for someone who just has a great energy, right? I think what I found is when people kind of get a sense of either the ability to ask like, hey, what kind of person are you looking to put in this role, right? I think that's extremely important. Someone who interviews a lot of people, when people come forward and they say, what's your team dynamic? What is this role going to be doing? Who are you looking to fill that role? What kind of person? usually an interviewer will tell you, hey, I'm looking for someone who's a great team leader, or I'm looking for someone who's self-sufficient. I'm looking for someone who's X, Y, or Z. And build your interview around that if you fill those roles, right? A lot of people go in as themselves, right? You obviously want to be yourself, but every interview is going to be different. Everyone's going to be looking for a different kind of candidate to report to them. And then on top of that is just having the base level understanding conversationally of what that team does. I feel like a lot of people, they come in with a great institutional knowledge of either accounting or finance in general, but they don't know the terms that we are working with. You're not expected to be an expert, right? Obviously, in any job, but to say, hey, I have a very 10% understanding of how this works, do a little bit of go back to college. Like if you're applying to a job that you're dying to get into, read some online one-on-ones. How does this work? What are the key terms? What are the drivers? That goes for any job, right? It's important to maybe know some shows. A lot of people do that. They come in and they say, oh, well, like, I love this Sony show. That doesn't matter to me personally. That just shows that you search Sony TV and you know the show. Like, I think the former of what I was describing is much more important, is saying, hey, I understand conceptually this is what your team does. Is this right? Is this wrong? And then other things that stand out, I think, like I was describing earlier, people were talking about, I didn't come from film TV. I think that's just a hiring manager by hiring manager basis. Are they looking for, sure, like expect a lot of them are looking for people who have film TV experience. That definitely helps. But if you don't have that, like your resume should very clearly state why your experience is relevant to this job and how it could be translatable to what you're doing. For me, I had a lot of depreciation experience, which is like a very finance accounting thing. That translates to what I do now in amortization. They're very similar. Depreciation is a physical good as it ages over time. Amortization is accounting for an intangible good, like a TV show, over time. So like having some kind of relativity in your resume will stand out. And again, I'm saying a lot of these things because I didn't have someone in the industry. That's why I love what you're doing with this podcast. I didn't have someone in the industry or this source of information of what do I need to know going into an interview that may help me succeed. And I really wish at the time I did have someone to talk to or glean information from to say, this is what we're looking for from the outside world to come in. Yeah, those are just some, like, a handful of tips of me as a hiring manager, what I'm looking for. And then just in the interview itself, good energy, excited. Obviously, every single person is nervous in an interview. It's a big experience. You're being judged. You're being summed up. It's a lot. And like that's recognized. It's a lot to go through an interview. But to show that you're excited, you're calm, you're listening, you're aware. Like think a lot about, if you have to take improv classes or acting classes or work on that in the mirror, whatever it might be, that when you're sitting in that room, you're not just in a panic of like, I'm not prepared for this job. I'm not qualified. Like feeling that sense of panic is palpable, right? So it's saying, I'm just having a conversation with someone looking to fill a role. I feel that I may be qualified. Ask the right questions. Listen to what they're asking you of. Take a few moments to interpret what they're asking. Answer reasonably. Those are my, tips and tricks of going into like an interview.
I think that's great advice. Ultimately, we're all just trying to make it. And I think those tidbits are just pure gold. And I really appreciate you coming on the show to give that advice and just to talk finance. I feel like I learned so much about that sector that I never was a part of. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. Love all the output of this podcast, so I can't wait to hear who comes next.
Everybody at home, thank you so much for watching this video. We really appreciate it. I'm doing this to help you guys, so help me in return. Just subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment. I think all those things will help keep this going and keep this growing. So thank you so much, and I can't wait for next week's guest. And thanks, and we'll see you next time.